Okay. Let's call the meeting to order at 7:29. Roll call. Board members are here, but are required to be. Meeting approval of the agenda.
So move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I didn't see any public comments. Any public comments? No public comments. We'll move on to the next item. I'll turn it over to Steve. Or is everyone take this to explain there?
Thank you, Jack. So Ellie and I had the next couple of topics in both the facility committee agenda on Monday and a budget today, just because of the importance of them. So what we're really referencing with this agenda item is a $99 million borrowing that the board approved last January. And what we were hoping would happen has really come to fruition, which was we borrowed in January before the Federal Reserve raised rates, like I think it was either 3 or 4 times in a row. And then we were able to invest at a much higher rate than what we borrowed at. Where we're now looking forward throughout 2024 and into 2025, we're starting to see information that it's going to be very challenging for us to meet the spending requirements that come with bond issues like this. If you don't meet the spending requirements, a portion of the interest earnings have to be returned to the IRS. Right now, we're estimating that we would earn about $5 million on the $99 million by the time this is done. And our calculations show that the IRS would only allow us to earn $3.6 million unless we meet the requirements that we've included in the notes. So in the notes, we're saying that we'd have to spend 25% by August 1st, prior August 1st, which we've met that requirement. 50% of the funds need to be spent by February 1st. We're on track to meet that requirement. And then by August 1st of 24, we have to spend 75% of the 99 million. And that's where currently is we're estimating out through 2024, we're behind schedule to meet that requirement. And then 100% by February 1st of 2025. And then we're obviously continuing to be behind schedule. So at the facility committee meeting, we talked about 3 paths, and really the importance of these 3 paths are going to impact the facility committee the most significantly, depending on which way we go. But the 3 paths are, we could seek a lower rate of return of investments to reduce the overall interest earnings. The point of that would be to try to lower the $5 million to get it closer to the 3.6. The second option would be to continue our current investment plan and spending plan with the understanding that we will unlikely meet the August 1st and February 1st spend down requirements. And whatever the calculation ends up being, right now we think it's 1.4, would have to be paid back to the IRS. The third path is to continue our current investment plan, but accelerate our spending plan with a goal of meeting the 75% and 100%. If that approach is preferred, administration will need to present capital maintenance expenditures of a significantly larger scale over the next couple of months. We will also have to work with Vogel Brothers to seek opportunities to lock in costs for the middle school. So examples of larger capital maintenance expenditures would be, we have a $750,000 proposal from Westfall to replace every classroom light in the high school with modern LED lighting. So that would be an example of how we could fairly quickly start bringing forward some very large projects to be completed in 2024. An example on the middle school. Vogel is already beginning discussions with Endress here in town. About the idea of locking in supply, steel supply for the middle school. And beginning to purchase the materials that we would need for the new middle school. So we have options. But as we talked about with the facility committee on Monday, there isn't necessarily a, right or a wrong answer. There's just different approaches. There are districts in Wisconsin that our financial advisor shared with Ally and I that have already made the payment back to the IRS or are planning to. And their boards maybe weren't comfortable with a path to try to hit that goal, or maybe they weren't planning it out, maybe they weren't tracking it. I don't know what their particular circumstances are, but there are districts that have already, just paid it back because they haven't met the requirements or won't. Because we're quite a ways away from August, so we've been keeping our eye on this for a while. We have the ability to follow one of these three different paths, depending on what our board thinks is the best approach. But we just need the board members to be comfortable with wherever we're going and the pace of what we're doing with whatever the approach might be. And then administration will just move forward accordingly. So questions, comments?
For number 3, when you're looking at future expenditures that are in the pipeline, do you have a feel for like how many things would need to be pulled forward in order to hit the August and February dates? To see if that's a reasonable number of projects. Like, I'm just wondering if it's like pull ahead 10 or if it's pull ahead 50, which
Well, one of the
seems to
things
be
that we talked about at the facilities committee is by pulling these projects forward, look at the capability and how we could do that. And then hire, basically, if you look at the track, we hired an LTE to, basically do the project management of that. And I think by pulling it forward, and there's a lot, that we could do with that. But I think it's within the, according to our discussion at the facilities committee meeting, it's in the realm that we can do it.
That's an important question for us to look at as far as how we, but I think what Jack is talking about, we had an individual who managed the track and the teacher project this summer because we had other that work. That was a good kind of foray into that kind of piece. But we've also been talking to our two Vogel brothers and to Steinmeier and our internal team here just to see what else we can do. I think we have capacity to do it. From our perspective, administratively, is we don't want to get back on 1.1 million. So we want to figure out how we can utilize it. I think there's enough. Mark?
Yes, 2 questions. A question and a statement. If we go ahead with option 3, will the interest rate be somewhat lower than closer to the 3.6, or will that still be 5 million and we get to keep it because we spent we met our targets?
Yeah, excellent question. So we will be on track for the $5 million, even if we follow 3, because the $5 million was built upon the assumption we would be spending at a faster pace than we have been.
Okay. Well, to me, then it's kind of a win-win to go with 3, because if we don't hit it, we pay back 1.5. But if we do hit it, it's an advantage for the district financially. So if it's viable to do it, that would seem to make the most sense to me.
And just to follow up on your question, Don, the dollar amount that right now that we're at a high level of looking at that we would potentially miss is about maybe 10 million. And so between the middle school, which is an example, if we go down the route of the steel purchase, that's over 5 million alone to get that part of it going. But then we'd be very likely looking at, $3 to $5 million worth of maintenance projects. We'll talk in a minute about energy efficiency as possibly being a component of that. But we could do something in the neighborhood of like $1.5 million on lighting. And then probably one of the most significant issues regarding the high school campus is the fact that both the middle school and the high school have antiquated clock, bell, and PA systems. So like our new schools do not have anything close to what those schools have. That's very likely between those two buildings, $1 million, and we could do that now, which would ultimately tie the two buildings together. So once the campus was available, you could, in the high school with the new system, communicate with the middle school building. And so we'd have the ability to set it up that way. So that's another example. We wouldn't necessarily want to bring forward a large number of small projects because we would probably have a difficult time managing all of that. So I think where Ally and I would probably focus our efforts on, like as far as getting the money spent, would be bringing the larger things to you that we know we need to do anyways at some point, but maybe just change up the order as to what we thought we were going to be doing. Our intention with the clock, bell, and PA system originally was to wait till we got closer to the actual campus occurring. But there's no reason why we can't move that up because we needed to do it anyways. So this isn't an action item. It was just really to get you thinking about it. We do have it on the agenda for next Monday night, just to make sure that all board members are aware of the issue. And then our intent is, because we did hear feedback from the facility committee to put some of these projects in front of them, that we will work administratively to get some of the information ready for these projects. And between January and March, we're going to start bringing more of them to the facility committee. And then at that time, they have the potential to be action items.
It's a question here, we're looking at like a $1.4 million interest paying back the IRS. Can that be paid back to the taxpayer as well? Or because of the rules, it's got to go back?
It would have to go back to the IRS. Yeah. Good question though, because interest earnings, there are a couple things you could do with them. One is giving back to the local taxpayers by reducing the property tax levy for the debt service payment or paying the debt earlier. And that still will be an option with this project because this is just one part of the borrowing. We don't have the same kind of rules on the first 10 million we borrowed. And it'll be much different with the next borrowing because the middle school will be in full construction mode by the time we do our next borrowing, and the money will be spent much quicker.
When's that gonna be?
So the next borrowing, we believe, Ally and I believe it's going to be necessary in the December 24 or January 25 type of time frame. So somewhere in there.
Okay. We're gonna just remind the middle school is gonna open in 26, right? Yep. So we gotta have this spent by 25.
This portion of it, yes. Yep. And then the next borrowing, let's just say we borrow the remainder all at one time, will have its own set of rules that will go beyond 2026. All right, Rebecca, you mind going to the next topic? So this is informational at this point in time. We shared this with the facility committee as well, but it's a very unique, I'll call it an opportunity for us as a district and for the board to be thinking about. The Inflation Reduction Act from August of 2022 introduces an entire new element for public school districts for the topic of energy efficiency. And districts have never been able to receive direct payments back from the federal government for energy efficiency. Payments that have been offered to entities that don't pay taxes has been tax credits that turn around and have to be sold at a discount to businesses that pay taxes that would want them. So for the first time ever, we're eligible for the Inflation Reduction Act, which is a direct payment to like a public school district for investments. Certain investments qualify. So a perfect example of that is the solar project at Heritage. Absolutely qualifies for the 2024 direct payment program, potentially up to 30% of that project, which would be about $90,000, would be returned to the district. What's interesting about that is the return of those funds, according to both our auditor and an attorney we've talked to, is a Fund 10 deposit, while these are Fund 49 referendum expenditures. So it's kind of a unique twist in that we can actually use the money for educational programs in Fund 10 while spending in Fund 49. So we put some data in here. We're not going to spend a lot of time on it, but the data basically shows as a district, compared to our peers, we're a lower spending district in Dane County. But when it comes to utilities, we're a high spending district. And it's been that way for a while. We've known that. The major reason for that is the fact that when you look at the middle school, the high school, Prairie, those are the three buildings with the oldest lighting. We've never as a district have invested in a whole building lighting program to go into all the classrooms. We've invested in the gyms, some hallways, outside lights. We've done the best we can to like hit the big lighting areas. But it's the classrooms where a majority of the consumption occurs. And also Arboretum, even though it is a relatively, it's not an older building, the lighting in there is clearly out of date as well. So we have 4 buildings that have the potential for significant lighting upgrades. When you go into an existing building and do a lighting upgrade, that actually goes under the 2005 Energy Policy Act instead of the direct pay. That's where we would end up having to get into also the business of selling credits to businesses for some type of discount. Under this program, we could only sell those tax credits to the businesses working with us on the referendum. Epstein, Ewan, Vogel, Westfall, NAMI. So we have a group of businesses that we have the potential to work with. But what's interesting about energy efficiency is in general, it has the ability for us to reduce our Fund 10 utility expenditures moving forward. Improve classroom lighting throughout our 4 older facilities. We can now pursue both state and federal energy efficiency incentives. And then there's the environmental impact of reduced energy usage. So there is a real potential to combine the first topic, which is our need to move some larger projects forward in 2024, with targeting energy efficiency projects as a way to do that, with multiple benefits coming back to the district. So we're just sharing this with you. We're going to have another agenda item in about 20 minutes that goes through a couple of partnerships we would need to enter into. We would need both accounting and legal support to pursue these federal programs. They're not like super high cost, but the bottom line is we definitely would need assistance if we're going to start navigating these federal systems and trying to work with tax credits and that type of stuff. So this is not an action item. It's just to be thinking about, because when we get into early 2024, we are likely going to be bringing these projects forward to the facility committee. And what would be an action item later on in the agenda is if there's any interest in this committee or the board engaging in the partnerships that we would need to have set up to go after this money, basically. Thoughts, questions?
And I think it's a good idea to pursue these. You know, obviously, you don't know if, what you're gonna get out of tax credits, you know, because you're selling them at a discount. It might be a 15% discount, might be a 50% discount. But, you know, I think it's worth it to pursue this. You know, I guess the other thing that, you know, I would at least look into, you know, when you go after this, if we're gonna put LED lights throughout that building, we might be able to use that for, you know, a website. It's, you know, and that might reduce, you know, IP costs and maintenance and things like that. Because you got that network throughout the building, that keeps your network within the building, you know, so some other benefits there. So I would encourage you to look at that too.
Yeah, I mean, we appreciate the board, you know, having an open mind to looking at this. I mean, obviously, this whole topic is new for public schools. Going after the direct pay program, it doesn't even open up until 2024. And schools have shied away from the tax credit program as well. Just because of the complications. I mean, as Jack mentioned, it's always sold at a discount. And so it's just something schools have shied away from. However, there is the potential for a really nice combination of things here. Our need to get some expenditures out the door, a focus on energy efficiency, which has multiple positive impacts, and the ability to seek federal funding, to me, is a combination that is at least worth pursuing.
So, excuse me. In the proposal here, or not proposal, description, it looks like you're targeting the high school and Prairie as the first two schools. Why not the high school and middle school, since they're the two oldest schools, instead of Prairie, as an example?
Yep, that's a great question. So we, in anticipation, Allie and I have seen the numbers on planning for 2024 for a while, and have been intending to have this discussion once we had the chance to get it on agendas. We've been prepping for some of these larger projects and the idea of maybe needing to move forward in this direction. So Westfall, which is the board's approved contractor for lighting, is going to go through all four of them. They just have only got two of them done, which is part of the reason why as well, we're not asking for any, because I agree with you, Mark, the middle school is probably the second school you'd want to do. The high school for sure, number one, then probably the middle school. But the age of the middle school and Prairie aren't all that different, but the middle school is older. They both have lighting in there that needs to be replaced. But yeah, we definitely are looking at that.
Right, thank you.
Yep.
Seems like a good investment for long-term return. I mean, I'd rather pay taxpayer money on education, not on utilities. So, yeah.
Okay, Rebecca, if you want to move on. Allie, do you want to? Oh, I'll have you do 24, 25. I was sliding to that. 23, 24. So just a couple of topics that we want to review with you. The first is a discussion of the carryover budgets. We've had a couple of conversations with Jack about the carryover balances that are currently available. Rebecca, would you mind if we get a chance just opening that up? Just as information for you, on the far left, you would see bottom line is $1.2 million worth of our district's overall fund balance is considered department and building carryover balances. This concept was maybe introduced 8 to 10 years ago. Prior to that, we didn't allow this. And this was done back then with the concept from the board regarding longer term planning. The board, the intent of the board when this was approved, excuse me, was to encourage administrators leading our building and departments to think across fiscal years for their financial goals. And I think Jack is looking for an update really as to where are we at with that? What are the goals of our various building and department administrators, and how is this program really working? Because obviously this is a significant dollar amount that's sitting out there. So we're only bringing this to your attention to share with you that our intent is, Ally and I, to work with our colleagues to bring back to this committee information as to further information on what are they planning? You know, what are those big rocks that they're working on, so that you can see, as an example, at the high school, what is the high school working on with that $71,000 balance? What are the intentions with that? And what are the plans across years? And so our goal is to get that back to you at a future budget committee meeting. We're just throwing it on the agenda because that's Jack has expressed an interest for this committee to get an update on where this program is at and what are the plans for these funds.
The reason that we did this is, you know, when we put this in, we had pianos from like 1969. They couldn't even be tuned anymore. And there was, you know, we don't put those budget items in our budget. You know, we just kind of expect somehow they're going to get replaced. So in order to do this, like stoves and refrigerators and, you know, things like that, you know, that's what this money was intended for. Playground equipment, I think we've had a couple emails saying, hey, we need to update our playground equipment, and some of those funds would come out of the carryover. So I think, you know, in order to do this and make the program work, it'd be nice to understand, you know, where are these funds earmarked for, you know, so that you can save them over a 2 or 3 year period, and don't think you got money to invest in stuff that's not in the budget.
So we will bring this back. Thank you, Rebecca. You can add out of that. So natural gas purchasing. So we've had further meetings on this topic. We did believe our symmetry rep was going to be joining us this morning. He must have had something come up. But we will, Ally and I met with him, and so we have a good understanding of really where this is at. He provided updated information to us that we can bring up and take a look at. So what we're really looking at with this issue is really a philosophical question for you as board members. Historically, we have purchased natural gas off the market, whatever the market is doing in that particular month. We do purchase natural gas through a third-party provider, and we have for probably 20 some years instead of MG&E. So we do achieve savings. We do get an annual report that compares what would have been through the MG&E rates versus a third-party provider. So there's savings that are there just in the method of our purchasing. But there are districts that go further than just purchasing from a third-party provider by doing things called locking in or pre-purchasing a portion of the natural gas. The options can range all the way from doing like 25% of what you're going to use versus 50%, or going much higher if you really like what you're seeing. And Rebecca, could you bring up that first document? So if you look at, as an example, just for a discussion's sake, if you look at January, if you look at the row of January and go across to 2023. So January of 2023, we used 50,000 therms of natural gas across all of our buildings, and the price was 73.5 cents. up in the upper left, you can see that futures pricing for what we could purchase it for right now for January is 0.375 cents per therm. So as a board, if a goal is to kind of lock in budget certainty or savings compared to where we were a year ago, you could direct Ally and I to work with Symmetry to purchase anywhere up to, 50,000 therms of natural gas at 0.375. And we would have to do that before the January trading closes at towards the end of December. Or you could instead, maybe as a board, be concerned that if you look under 2021 for a moment, you see pricing went all the way down to 0.308. So what you never really know about this topic is the wide combination of natural gas storage, the weather, what's happening with the weather, what's happening with production. We have a separate document in here that we won't pull up unless you want to, that really kind of goes over what causes the changes to occur in natural gas pricing. There's always pros and cons to the concept of repurchasing. The advantage of purchasing at 0.375 would be, what if over the next 2 weeks, temperatures plunge, production slows, storage is being pulled, and the rates for January go up to 50 cents. Well, we forego the opportunity to purchase at 0.375, and now we're paying 0.50. That's just the way it would be. Now, on the other hand, the risk we have of buying at 0.375 is if it's incredibly warm across the country for the next couple of weeks, storage remains high, production remains high. And when we get to January, the actual market price drops to 0.30. So that's one of the possibilities, right? That the actual price could go further down. So there's pros and cons in general. Oh, hey, Dan, you want to grab a seat by Ally?
Do we know what the 10-year market low was? Because if it's 0.300, which was the low that I'm spotting out of this chart, and we buy 50,000 therms, I mean, we would have lost out on a potential of $3,750 versus some of these highs of 0.73. So that just, I mean, you're better off taking advantage of the 0.375 because you may have lost out on 3,000, but you've protected yourself against things like 0.735. So
Right.
like how low does it ever go?
Yep, and that's a great point. We'll let Dan weigh in on that. So basically, Don, what you're just bringing up is what Dan has described as probably the main reason why someone locks in is that budget certainty. Right, you lock in because you are feeling good about the price. And you're feeling like there's way more of a chance that the price could go to 0.45 or 0.5 or 0.55 than to go down to 0.25, right, or 0.3. So to some degree, you're locking in some budget certainty. And you're doing that because you're sitting there saying, we don't think there's all that much more of a downside, but in the event that things happen to go sideways and the rates go way up, we just missed an opportunity to book quite a bit of savings. So Dan, can you talk a little bit about that? Like, where the market is at today, the concept of budget certainty and locking in and kind of upside and downside.
I mean, I think Steve, you hit it pretty well, is that we really don't know where the market's going to go, but from the school district standpoint, the districts I work with, it's really just from budget certainty, and there's no incentive. There's very little incentive for anybody to take lots of risks and try and reduce pricing, because it seems like when the prices rise, you always get the budgets are impacted more on the price spike or an increase than it is the market going forward, especially at these levels. And the market in general right now, weather is pretty much gonna drive pricing between now and as we get through winter. There's, we're at the lowest pricing we've seen in the front month since 2020, the summer of 2020. So, we're at really strong production levels. And then, the demand is just really weak because of the weather. The concern would be that next year, this time, or even into 25, there's gonna be more LNG exports and there's more gas-fired electric generation. So at some point, prices will come back around. We just don't, really know when that'll happen. Early demand, based on production levels where they are, demand is really what's kind of driving the market as far as pricing goes, and that's weather really for right now.
Dan, what is the current price? We're looking at potentially locking in at 275. What's
It's a little bit lower than that, I think, today, or from yesterday when I priced it. When we ran the pricing, just because the market is moving a little bit lower, like. I think it was, this one yesterday was 343 instead of 375. And then, but for the 3 months, the 6 month is 354, so it's not much different. And then the January through October is 407. So it's 42 cents. So it's not. The shorter term prices are moving lower just because there's less demand, and that there just seems to be putting more pressure on the pricing in the short term.
So Dan, our district has never locked in before. We've always been with you month to month.
Right.
For an organization like ours that has an interest in maybe getting some budget certainty and taking advantage of the lower rates. What would your recommendation be for our first attempt to go down this path of like locking in purchases, both from like a month's perspective and in usage? Like if you were working with a client that had never gone down this route before and you're saying what you're seeing, would you recommend just 3 months? Would you recommend 6 months? Would you recommend half of our usage? Would you recommend 3/4 of our usage? What would you, as someone who does this for a living, suggest we look at and consider?
I would say based on what we're seeing with the production demand levels, short-term hedging is probably more prudent, just because if we go on the same path where we see the weathers, we'll protect ourselves against a potential price spike in the winter with some weather that might come in. And then based on what we're seeing from a production standpoint versus a demand and where it's going to go, and your usage is less in the summer, I would do short-term hedging and see if we come out of the winter with a mild winter and there's more gas in storage and production levels are the same, prices for next winter will probably be lower than they are now. We never know, but based on what we see, that's a pretty good possibility. So in this case, with the way the levels are, I would do more short-term hedging.
Is that 3 months?
3 months I would do through the winter. 6 months would be the most I would do to go through June. And the June pricing, the only, in my opinion, the benefit would be you're reducing your winter price by a little bit. And then your usage when you get to April kind of falls off for a usage standpoint.
How about percentage of use? 50%, 75%? Like what would your recommendation be for a first, first
I would say probably just 50%, just gives you kind of some budget certainty, and especially in this environment, again, if we're gonna go mild winter, you're gonna use less gas. So in theory, you would, if you price more gas, you'd have a higher percentage price, unless you guys really like that price and want it set for some reason, which in the past, you guys haven't really done that. So from just kind of a conservative standpoint, if you priced half of it, you know what half your budget is going to be in the dollars, and then you can kind of do a pretty good range of where prices go and then what volumes you use, and kind of what your budget would look like. But then so that's what I would do in this case. It's a shorter term, just because of the way the market is is production is still strong. Demand is off, storage is high, and the forecasts are pretty mild. Which a forecast is, you know, they're not very accurate, but it just gives us a protection against potential price spikes.
Right, so the data that you're seeing is causing you to suggest, don't go out now to go into next winter, because there's a very good potential that next winter there'll be better opportunities, but the next 6 months, if you go out further, you do 6 months, your winter pricing is slightly lower. And we don't use a lot, and then something like 50%, if the board members were more interested in greater budget certainty, probably up to 75% might be something that you would be comfortable with. As Dan said, you don't want to go all the way up and then have a different usage, because you can see January, we've used in the last couple of years 43,000 up to 50. A lot of that's of course based on weather and use of the buildings. So, you know, one concept could be a 6-month lock at 50%. Another one could be a 6-month lock at 75%. Thoughts from board members on whether or not you wanted to consider something like this. It is on the agenda next Monday night as a possibility, if you would like to consider that.
Let's say I get a question from a natural gas standpoint, because we need to produce more uses on natural gas, right? You know, as you produce more gasoline and oil from.
Yep, yeah, there's associated gas, the industry calls it, so when you drill for more oil wells. Whatever comes up, some of it's gonna be natural, pushed into the natural gas market.
Right, so we get that going up or increasing, so there's probably gonna be more natural gas if energy production stays where it is, right?
You would assume so, yeah. Yeah, where natural gas, because it's, I'm not a geologist, but in general, when you drill for an oil well, there's byproducts that come out of the crude oil. And some of it's gonna go into the natural gas industry, into that marketplace. And then what would. And pricing though, like crude oil pricing is starting to drop a little bit. I don't know if that's gonna slow down any drilling. But at some point, if crude oil prices drop and the drilling slows, then you would see gas, a little, that associated gas would fall with it. And some of our, when you look at some of the data, the rig counts are falling. But the number of rigs are falling, but production hasn't started to fall yet. So there's some potential that the production could slow, and also is going to depend on pricing when it goes. But the thoughts are there's enough demand, like for the gas industry, there's projected gas usage growth with electric generation, as well as there's some new LNG export terminals that are supposed to come online. Those are hard to predict, but the end of 24, the second half of 24, maybe into 25. So then that, if those come into play, then that'll cause more gas to be shipped overseas. So then that production growth would be, so then in theory, you could see potential price. And that's kind of where we saw prices increase in the summer when they were so high. The production was trying to catch up to demand, and we had some pretty good growth, and we had a lot of hot weather. So then that's where some of that pricing kind of, so then you're fighting, the prices are, the industry just says the molecules are fighting to, you know, the highest price market where they're going. And then you want to keep them here in the US, as the world market is more expensive, you're going to end up with higher prices to keep them here. But right now, we're capped on LNG export capacity, and production is growing, and there's no demand in the US for the weather right now. So that means there's just more gas in the market. That's why the prices are low in general.
So thoughts on whether or not you'd like to see a recommendation for next Monday?
So in terms of the usage, you expressed like concern or risk around whether or not we would use as much. It doesn't expire though, right? So if you have what happens after 3 months if you don't use what it is that you've hedged on?
So each month the there's a fixed volume and a fixed price. And this, let's say we price 50% of our gas for the months for January, February, and March. We're gonna use all that gas up, so that's considered the first gas through the meter. So if we, let's say we priced 20,000 therms for January, you say. And so the first 20,000 therms are priced at 37.5 cents. And anything other than that's gonna be priced higher or lower depending on the market. So there really isn't any carryover from month to month. It's volumes per month. And at the end of that month, let's say we went as the other way, let's say we had 40,000 therms and we use 30. That 10,000 therms gets netted out to zero at the end of the month. Based on the pricing for that month. And then at the end of the month, then you're starting over really from zero again for the next. I mean, whatever's hedged for that next one. So there's no carryover month to month.
Right, so you don't wanna overbuy.
Right, because it'll get cashed out in the month that it's purchased, that's assigned. So like when we talk, like the 50% concept or whatever percentages, it's converted to a fixed volume based on your historical usage. And there's a fixed price associated with that. And at the end of the month, if you didn't burn that fixed volume of gas, it gets cashed out based on the market. So the net is zero. So you get a credit, you know, if you didn't burn it and the price was 40 cents, you'd get a credit. And if it was 35 cents, you know, it would cost you a couple cents to do that. If you don't burn all that, whatever incremental gas is that.
Is the volume, so say it was a 1-year one, is that volume that you're purchasing just the annual usage divided by 12? And that's how, like, or is it prorated or
It would
some kind
be-
of
it
ratio
would be a-
to what that month would
It'd
possibly
be
use?
based on the month that it's consumed. So we take an example, 50% of each month.
Mhm.
So you'd have more in your, so it's really a true 50% of your usage is price based on historical usage is price. Yeah, so it's not just a total divided by 12 and then allocated that way.
So, I'm sorry. So. For January, if we went 50%, it's not 50% of 50,000 therms, it's 50% of. What's getting locked in by therms?
The 3-year historical average.
Okay. all right.
And then what we do is we weight it 2 degree days, a normal, like a 10-year normal degree day. So there's heating degree days and gas you're gonna use, there's whatever the calculation is. So then, like last year, let's say it was cold and we used 10% more heating degree days than 10-year normal. We would push that back down to the 10-year normal. So we're basing the usage based on a 10-year normal. So we're trying to get an average, more of a normal winter. We're trying to take out the anomalies, because the other side would be if we use less gas in a January, let's say, and it's 10% warmer than normal. Now we want to raise that up to make it normal to make sure pricing at 50%. So we're trying to get as close to our 50% of the 3-year normal usage is really what we're trying to manage.
If we do it, I wouldn't want to go more than 50%. I'm a little bit. Wondering if this is the year to do it, given all the weather forecasts and that's been out there about. Warmer than normal, tendencies throughout the Midwest. Actually, through, upper United States, and so if. I see the sense of it, but I certainly wouldn't want to go more than 50.
Yeah, and we don't know where this is gonna happen, and the only concern you'd have from a weather standpoint is they're pretty inaccurate. The further out you go, weather forecasts are really inaccurate. And no matter if it's that like warming trend or cooling trend in the upper half, what causes a lot of disruption in the gas market is your polar vortex or the Arctic blocking, that those terms in the gas in the energy world or the other world. If the jet stream basically dips further south, then that's when the cold air comes down and it causes more demand in our world, but also further south, which can disrupt production, but just causes more demand. And what we've asked these questions to the weather services that we subscribe to. And there really isn't a good answer to say, is there a, any correlation between like the El Nino phenomenon and the dips, and they said there really isn't. So if you're, there's a potential that could happen, there's a potential it wouldn't happen either, where maybe the jet stream drops and it doesn't go past Wausau. And,
Right.
or even it goes down to Madison and it's a little colder, but it doesn't go further south. And so then it would be pretty mild. So that would be the only, I would put that in just as a, that's really what the risk is, I think, in this, in most winters. It's cold, but then sustained cold, and really in this, it's unpredictable cold. It's kind of so that's what we would be. That's what you'd be protected against, would be that short-term spike, which you, from what I understand of weather, it's maybe a week out, they can predict it. Maybe 2 tops.
So Mark, what I could see would be an advantage of potentially doing like a 6 month with 50%. Is giving us experience in doing this type of exercise, because as I mentioned, we've never done this before. 50% would allow us to have a learning experience to watch what happens over the winter. And in the end, this probably can be a useful tool moving forward to try to achieve that budget certainty. You know, we talked about last year, our utility budget was quite a bit off. Our actual expenses were quite a bit off what we budgeted. This puts us down a different path of more of an openness to monitoring this market a little bit more regularly. Putting this in front of the board members as opportunities to lock in. And it would give Ally and I an opportunity to learn how this works. So I think doing something like this in like the 50% range would give us a nice learning experience. I like the way you phrased it, Don, that, you know, you're probably not losing out on too many savings. You know, this isn't probably going to go down to 25 cents, you know, by locking in at and you just said the rate had gone down a little lower. We're not probably foregoing too much on the downside, but we are protecting ourselves in case something goes sideways on the high side. And I look at it again as a learning experience for us to do it. So,
Well, it also provides you 50% of the expenses if the market maintains a low level.
right,
You're not losing out on that.
right, yep.
But I think to Mark's point, I think this, you know, and some of the comments you made, you know, obviously gas prices, you know, or production is up. So we're gonna probably see some, you know, over allocation of natural gas in the market. We can't ship it because we don't have the LNG terminals up and running.
There's a maximum you can ship, yeah.
Yeah, so you get, you know, all of this storage that's gonna start going up until late 2024. When those LNG terminals come in. I guess given the warmth, given some of those concepts, I would rather experiment with this in 2024.
Well, I think demand's gonna start going up though, so that's going to bring price up.
Because what we will see in the winter is we'll see withdrawals from storage, because really, if you look at, I think we've talked about this last time I was here, or for sure with Steve and Ellie, that. So let's say a peak day in the US is 150 BCF and our production is 100. So that balance comes out of storage. So anytime we're in theory using, and really, so storage is used for deliverability. And that's what it's used for. And right now there just isn't the demand. So that's why it's high in storage. So if we have a normal winter, we'll pull gas out of storage for sure. And then it'll get injected at some point. And then if there's any unforeseen cold or spikes in cold, more will come out. And then and I think from Steve's standpoint is the other thing, when you look at this, there's really, I always kind of go back to, there's 2 reasons why you try and do this. One is hedging, one is budget management. And the other is you want to beat the market. And the second one is not going to happen. Because there's going to be times you're right, times you're wrong. So we need to kind of take that out, and if we're, so we might. It's kind of, you might, and then if you look at from a risk standpoint, 0 hedged or 100% hedged, those are the two riskiest scenarios. So then you look at somewhere in between, and whatever you're comfortable with, trying to manage your budget, and then take advantage of maybe some price dips and moves in the market and what you see, and the market's just gonna do what it's, it's gonna get priced based on how it gets priced. So I think that is, when we think about it, is like Steve's saying, that it's from a management standpoint, to try and just provide budget management. That's really what we're trying to do, and it's like, how much do we like, and you don't have to do it, but how much you wanna hedge, and then where is it gonna, what's the experience? Because you can always, so if you hedge, let's say a 6-month hedge or a 3-month hedge, whichever, or let's say you do a 6 months hedge. Well, you can look at it and you can kind of track to see where the pricing went. And then you can also look to see, let's say we come out and the prices have dropped. Let's say the highest price is, we pick the high, let's just say, and prices start to move lower. Well, then, you can look at, do we want to do some hedging for next winter? Because maybe next winter's prices now are lower than 375. So we're managing our budget. We're kind of locking in budget management, but then we're also taking advantage of some incremental maybe. So I mean, there's different, there's
So I guess, from my point, of view, go to,
for sure.
I was gonna say in 2024, we shouldn't be having this conversation in December. We really should
Well,
be
I think-
talking about hedging in July.
Right. So I
Yeah.
would like that.
Yeah.
I like the 50% at 6 months.
Which
sound
market
good.
index is this area traded off of? Is it the Chicago one?
It is,
Okay,
that's the cash market. And then when you look at, like, when we're doing hedging,
Mhm.
everything gets pushed back to the NYMEX. So,
NYMEX, okay.
yeah, the NYMEX for that. So that's how you do that. You do the hedging.
So Jack, you threw out the idea of 50% for 3 months, which is the majority of our use. I think that would be a good reasonable start for us to, see how this works. Thoughts
As
on,
of yesterday, for January through March, it was 0.343. So
okay, thank you, Ally.
Was what?
0.343.
Thoughts on a motion like that?
motion to, somebody want to throw out a motion there?
Well, is the motion being voted on today or are we bringing it to?
It would
the
be a
full board?
recommendation.
Recommendation to the full
Recommendation,
board.
okay. So I just heard the 3 months at 50%, right?
That's one option. Yep.
And you said 6?
3 months takes us through,
3 months reach through March, to the end of March.
it takes us, through the month of-
If you look at, April and May. Yeah, the prices are a little bit lower, both in 21 and 23. Our average. Maybe 3 months would be the best way to start. So,
Because we can revisit this, if this is working, then you guys would come back in a couple months and. And you guys are watching this on a regular basis anyways.
I would just make a suggestion to say, like, what is working is what's the goal we're trying to achieve, and that'll tell you kind of what's working with it or what isn't. If it's 100% price, it's probably going to be harder to. I mean, it might be hard to evaluate to say what's working and what's not, but. So I mean, if there's a reason, if it's budget management, then you can say, is this helping us manage our budget to help us? There's some districts that we work with that I worked with that have used this, taken the. Some people call it savings, they call it cost avoidance, depends what you want to call it. Like what the utility cost versus what your pricing is, and then hedge pricing, what that looks like, and if it saves you, let's say $30,000 a year, you can take that $30,000 and apply it to some building project or whatever you guys want. So I think that's from a budget standpoint, like you have your your energy budget or your coverage, your budgeting is set up. And if you have X amount of dollars for it and you're under, then you can take that and do a lighting project or do some HVAC work or something. I mean, I don't, that's just an idea, so it's like, if, it's what do you do, like kind of evaluation of why we're doing this kind of goes in, so you can evaluate. Cause we should sit down and do that, is it working or is it not, and what did we make our decision on, and if we said we wanted to price some gas based on this information we have, then we come back and say, all right, well, you know, here's what the information is today, and it didn't work, it didn't, that kind of thing.
And I think if you do that on a 3-month, you know, at least initially, gives you the experience on how the program works. You can evaluate it and then eventually go longer term, you know, in the future. Does that make sense? It does.
So motion to hedge for 3 months, based on 50% of the thermal usage.
Second.
All in favor?
I,
Thank you. And thanks for coming.
Oh, sure.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll be in touch after next.
Yep, if there's any more questions, just give me a buzz.
All right, sounds good. And then we just start sharing information with you about end of the year projection and where we're seeing things going. And we just noted a couple of things to just continue to keep our eye on. The first two are really energy related. Both of those items last year, we exceeded our budget on energy related costs. I mean, you saw the charts from the previous agenda item. So those just remain risk areas as we move forward. And then the third area is post-employment benefits. We've moved away from budgeting for those benefits and have instead worked with the budget committee in the spring regarding a decision on a payment. So that's just something we'll put back on your radar in the spring. But the good news is there has been no notable unplanned expenditure. I mean, we haven't brought any, I mean, this is the first time in quite a while. I can't remember the position that we've brought, and we're all the way through December almost. And so very minimal change to the budget as we had approved in October. So we're in a good spot. I think the energy costs are coming down, which will put us in a better spot. And then we'll be able to have the discussion in the spring about post-employment benefits and where we go with that.
So when we get to that, I get a little nervous with the multiple year after year not contributing in. And so just when we get to that point, where are we fiscally in terms of meeting our obligations, and are we in a good spot with that? Because if we can continue with meeting our obligations, obviously we're saving a significant amount of money.
Yep.
But if we need to start supporting it more, we need to move in that direction.
Yep, sounds good.
We have been, every spring, we have been contributing to this.
Yep, so
You know, so it's not like we haven't been putting money into this, it's just that it's not budgeted. And I think the strategy is to use what's, look at what's left over and contribute what we can.
Yep, and that's what we'll be doing this spring. And to your point, Mark, we'll provide some supporting information so you can get some history and where it's at. The good news is moving in the right direction. I'll probably pull some of Brian's data that he's been sharing with the teacher compensation committee on the points program change. And Brian shared some pretty interesting information in the last meeting that I think would be good for you all to see. Basically, the balance of points has come down, our obligation has come down, and I think that's just good information to be able to see as well.
super quick question, backing up to the natural gas piece. Are we contracted with Symmetry then? And what are the timing terms of that agreement if there is one?
So Symmetry is one of the third-party providers available to public school districts. We have not looked at competitors to Symmetry in a while, so That would be another thing that at some point, if we wanted to see how the market has changed, when this third party purchasing of natural gas started. There weren't many vendors available, and to be honest with you, I've not really looked into that marketplace recently to know what the landscape is. So Ally and I can look into that off the top of my head, what like the time frame of a commitment we have to them. I know there's not like an extended contract or anything. So I'm guessing it's more limited term, but we can look into that. We just definitely have not looked this deeply into that topic in a while.
Yeah. Is it like an RFP, RFQ kind of situation if you were to go to?
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
yeah, okay, sorry to
Yep,
interrupt.
no, that's no problem. I'm gonna ask Ally to jump into some 24-25 planning information. Ally?
Sure. So to start off, we put the updated timeline for budget planning for 24-25 in there. So if you want to take a look at that, that's available to you. The next item is looking at enrollment projections for next year. We did end up utilizing the 5-year average for this year in budget planning. One of the biggest takeaways from what we found was that by moving each grade forward, we would be losing 113 students. And then it shows that we only have 100 students coming in, which would mean that for next year, we would have a loss of 13 students. In the
Okay.
document, it shows different. Yeah.
That's just students that are in the district, right? That doesn't include open enrollment.
That would be total student count, so, yeah. In this document, it does show different models that we could utilize. We did select the 5-year average just because that seems to be the most accurate and it's the one we've used in the past. But we would look for feedback on using this enrollment methods.
And just to share what we're hearing from our Dane County peers is even more drastic reductions than this. Districts that have historically been rapidly increasing enrollment districts like Sun Prairie and Middleton are seeing projections with declines at a more significant rate than what we have. And generally speaking, what's occurring throughout Dane County is large classes in the high school graduating and being replaced with much smaller incoming kindergarten classes. In fact, like Middleton's 4K numbers this year aren't even that much different than ours. And so their Middleton is experiencing significant declining enrollment is going to be hitting them in the next few years. We're best described right now as stable enrollment. You've got a large loss from the senior class graduating. I think Ally said 113. The model is showing growth, possibly, 100 students moving in, netting out at a slight decline, very stable. And that's what the model shows. I mean, what Rebecca has on the screen, if you look at that very bottom line that says change, you can see what each of the models is recommending for a change. It's basically a very stable scenario. And one of the largest trends I think that's just happening right now that just is a reality for the economic climate is people are staying in their homes. So when you have mortgage rates that many people locked in 3-4 years ago at 3%, even if they're now at a point where their children have graduated, they're saying, I'm not going to turn over this home because my alternatives are a 7% mortgage somewhere else. And so we're not seeing that kind of turnover in the real estate industry that typically would happen in a low rate environment. We still have growth. Obviously, we have neighborhoods like Golden Ponds, which has just opened up out in Westbridge. We have Bishop's Bay, we have Heritage Hills, we have the completion of Carriage Ridge. We have development occurring, which is the fundamental reason why we still have the 100 students being projected to move in. We have, of course, some turnover, But in this economic climate, you're just not seeing the traditional housing turnover that you would expect to see. So Ally and I believe that these models are going to be really close. We should not expect to see a +50 in our student count next fall. We shouldn't expect to see a -50. But between the two, it is way more likely we have a -50 than a +50. As you're looking at the risk between the two.
I think when you look at the whole of this community wise over the next. We have some growth coming in the next few years, but if this trend continues. In order for the district to maintain kind of this stuff. Budgetary programs and the enrollment that you want, you're going to have continued growth. That's just how our system is set up. And it's. I think you go back traditionally, you would see houses turn over and people moving to different types of homes, and then families with kids coming in. That's just not the case anymore. As Steve said, people are staying. So some of the new subdivisions that are expanding, those are important to us from enrollment growth, because those are the ones that are breaking.
When you say our system, it's the state budget system.
That's what I meant, the state's school finance system.
That's right.
Rebecca, if you want to bounce back, and Ally's going to talk about high level 5-year projection, and then kind of where we're going to go between this month and next month.
Sure, Rebecca, could you pull up the document, please? So we've used our budget model to project out 5 years. In this model, we have used the 5-year average for enrollment. We've also used the $325 per student that will continue on during those 5 years. We also have the non-recurring referendums in there for 8.1 million. We have those continuing, but in the case that they would not, you can add the 8.1 million to the deficit, the red number on the margin line there, to see what our total deficit would be for those years. We also have expenditures increasing for CPI plus the salary compensation systems we have in place. We have health insurance increasing at 3%, transportation and utilities increasing at 5%. And then I'll also just note that ESSER funding will be used up this year, so that is not the budget for any of the other things.
So I like, just to make sure clear, the margin incorporates the ongoing operating referendum.
That would be if it continues, yes. So the 8.
So without that, we add another 8 million to the
Correct.
deficit margin.
A couple of points to make. At a higher level, what all public schools are going to be dealing with. I've used the term the disconnect between the revenue increases in the state budget and inflationary costs. Right, so the $325 per student, while it has a significant improvement from the recent past, is a percentage increase that isn't even half of inflation. So when you look at inflation, even though it's coming down, the CPI for July 1st of 2024 is going to be around 4.15. So the $325 increase in the state budget does not even cover a CPI increase for current staff. The only reason why in the 24-25 column it works is it's the last year of the operational referendum that was approved by the public in November of 2022. If you remember, that was a 3-year question, 1 million, then 3, then 6. So the only reason we're able to show a balanced budget in 24-25, because you see the margin is only 110,000 there. It's balanced because we are able to utilize that 3rd year of the prior operational referendum question. You will see a significant conversation occurring at the state convention if you go there, or amongst school board members at meetings that you go to, about this very reality for all public school districts. When you map out CPI and ongoing inflation for things like utilities, transportation, health insurance, et cetera, against the revenue increase from 325, districts are gonna have one of two choices, two paths to go down. One is to seek the difference through an operational referendum, and more schools are going that route. The other is to lower your expenses, meaning changing the way you approach increases for personnel, utilities, transportations, FTE, et cetera. And in a competitive marketplace like Dane County, you are finding that districts aren't going that route. Districts are going the operational referendum route to stay competitive, to attract and retain high quality staff. So that's really the model in Dane County, where you've got the Middletons, Oregon, Verona, Sun Prairie, now Monona Grove, all having access to operational referendum funds when they get into this discussion. So for us, we have a fairly positive picture for 24-25. You go beyond that, and now you're seeing very clearly the disconnect. And as Ally mentioned, this model is built on the $8.1 million continuing. And you can then see very clearly what's happening, right? So in 25-26, we have brought CPI down further. And by bringing it down further, the deficit isn't quite as significant, but it's still $1.4 million. And so as we move into the winter, and next there'll be an agenda item to talk about a community survey, we are going to have a long-term perspective on where we're going with this topic. We're either going to go out for continued operational referendums to make up that difference, or we're going to have different conversations about the expenditure increases that are included in here. This is just simply a first high-level look. There's good news in here in that we have access to operational referendum funds in 24-25. We are close to balancing with CPI increases. Health insurance at 3% is incredibly challenging. We are not going to get a 3% rate renewal. So that would mean further adjustments to the health insurance program that we offer. And this is just, again, the initial discussion. Another challenge with this is there is no additional FTE in here. There is no FTE for the middle school program or for any other programs. This is just continuing people forward from one year to the next. After this, the next agenda item, Ally's going to talk about what we're going to dive into. Now we start getting into the real detail. So I don't know if you want to jump into that next agenda item for a minute, Ally, and talk about what we're going to be doing between the next 2 months.
Yeah, so I think the next major thing that we're gonna have discussions about is the open enrollment capacity. And approving that at the January 2024 board meeting. We'll be using the enrollment projections and FTE planning to see how many open enrollment spots we have available and to see what our capacity is, to see if we can open more spots than we maybe have in the past. But still stay within existing school board policies for maximums. We will be presenting information on the middle school plan that would include the 4 additional FTE for the scheduling changes. And that would be associated with the open enrollment capacity and class size also.
So you've heard the presentation on the middle school scheduling. I have talked with Tim Shell and Jeff at the middle school about accelerating their work in the area of what would that look like for class size. Because if we are going to go down that path for 24-25, I want the board to be able to see class size information in January, because there's no option for making a decision on open enrollment 2 months later when you've seen the full middle school picture. So unfortunately, January, when it comes to class size and FTE planning has been defined for us by the state as this is your window. So we do want to put that in front of you, and one positive about kind of forcing that information to come maybe a little bit earlier than we originally were thinking is a portion of the FTE would be funded by open enrollment students. You know, using that approach versus waiting until March or April to get maybe a more comprehensive look at it. It'd be too late, right? So that's something we want at least to be able to put on your radar, that when you get the information in January from us, our intention is going to be to push forward the conversation at the middle school one way or another. If there is interest in implementing for 24-25, we want to show you what the class size looks like. And then ultimately, as a board, you weigh in on open enrollment every year in January and make those decisions. We just don't want to have the alignment of that come 2 months later and then have as board members, you say to us, well, why didn't you show us that in January? When we could have done something with open enrollment.
I guess the other thing that I'd like to, charge you with, early on when I was on the board, we looked at, cost savings. And we looked at that telephone system, for example, we looked at different projects. How do we, in light of this, not only look at class size and so forth, but how do we operate more efficiently? Is there areas that we can take a look at, to do that, which isn't gonna affect the operation?
And to Jack's point, Don, just to share with you, a few years ago, we had a much, I'll call it thicker, larger budget planning document that included more of what Jack is saying. And we have access to a pretty powerful tool that lets us pull information out, like the utility information we shared. And Ally and I had talked about going back to taking a look at that, because we always can find opportunities where our expenditures are just not aligned with our peers. And sometimes that's in areas that we want. Maybe we're investing in curriculum at a higher level. Sometimes it's areas we don't, like utility expenditures. And it is important to look at that because we can learn from it and we can make changes based on what we're seeing. We should probably jump into discussion action on proposals unless anybody had any other questions on budget planning. We've got a few of them in front of you. The first one, I mentioned in the notes at the board retreat this past summer, we discussed the concept of the school perceptions community survey to receive feedback on a variety of financial planning topics. We would recommend being on a schedule to get that completed prior to spring break. And then a draft of that survey in early February. So the intent behind this would be to learn from the community regarding the long-term financial planning topic for us as a district and where we go moving forward. We are faced with the 2 operational referendum questions that expire. We're faced with the decision on either renewing or not renewing. And then we're also faced with the discussion on planning over the next 4 to 5 years. Where do we go with that? Examples of some of the questions that you would want to know from the community is, does the community want to see operational referendums on a 2-year cycle that aligns with the state budget? Do they want to see them less frequently? Do they want to see them every 4 to 5 years? Does the community want to see recurring versus non-recurring? There's a variety of topics that as a board, we think you would want to know where people are at. Another great example is the board has a goal of catching up hourly pay to our comparable average. Brian has put a rough price tag on that in the past between, I think, 900,000 and $1 million. Correct me if I'm wrong, but somewhere in that range. You gotta ask the public about a question like that, because the only way to fund it is through an operational referendum and adding it to that. Those are the type of things that we would be working with this committee on over the next couple of months to create that community survey. So if we want to move ahead with that, we would need to get the process moving. If we don't approve it now, it just moves it back a month. So we're suggesting we get this done by spring break, but this is of course all based on your thoughts and feedback, Randy.
Just to quit, I mean, I would recommend we highly do this. I think it serves two purposes. One is feedback and one is communication.
Mhm.
Lets the community know what we're thinking about. It kind of reorientates them to some of the issues that we have out there. And then we get some feedback that can guide us into some of our decisions. So I think the timeline Steve's laid out is appropriate.
For the
You
next
need to,
referendum.
So,
For the next referendum, we'll have it in time. Okay.
motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So for the next topic, Ally and I have requested a long-term proposal from our school district auditing firm. Also to share with you, our school district auditing firm also has a national program for assisting public clients with the federal energy efficiency program that we had referenced earlier. So these agenda items go a little bit together. So we have a proposal from Wifley for a 5-year audit engagement. The next agenda item also includes a proposal from Wifley for the accounting services that we would need to seek out those federal funding. So they have the services to do both. The reason for looking at a 5-year engagement is the last 2 audit firms that we worked with in Waunakee left the public auditing world. The profit levels just aren't there for these auditing firms like they are in the private sector, and more of them are pulling out of public school auditing. We feel it's important to secure those services for a longer term partnership, as well as partner with an accounting firm that has the ability to assist us with the accounting components of the federal energy efficiency. So we have proposals for your consideration for both. And then in addition, in the federal energy efficiency, we need very specialized legal services to assist us with that. So we're recommending a Madison-based attorney, Michael Allen, to partner with us to make sure that the contracts are being exercised the way they need to. Of course, our district's attorney has the ability to work on these topics. This is just very, very specialized work. And our belief is that it could be done much more efficiently by someone who does that for a living. And so I'm kind of pairing the next 2 together, but we're recommending securing a long-term partnership with Wifley for both our annual audits as well as federal energy efficiency, and then partnering on the legal end with Michael Allen for those services.
So if it's a 5-year deal, but we're only securing the guarantee on the rate for 23-24, is that correct?
We do have a 5-year
Okay,
proposal from them to secure the rates for a 5-year period of time. And the only other thing I'll share with you is if we combine both services, they have offered a 10% discount on the audit fee.
motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, Rebecca, if you want to scroll on. Traffic study, so we spent a lot of time on this at the December board meeting. We got some great feedback from the board and went back to our traffic consultant. We've divided out the proposal between the 2 new schools and the existing schools. This is a much more targeted, focused approach than what you saw in the packet for the, I'm sorry, the November board meeting. So we have a comprehensive review for the two new schools, which would be needed. And a targeted review for our existing schools, and the proposal show the exact neighborhoods that we would target for review. Approving both would put us in the position to have very comprehensive, up-to-date hazardous transportation plans for all of our buildings, both new and existing, prior to the start of the next school year, which then would assist the policy committee with the larger review, and to Randy's point that he shared in November, to take this in steps, with this being the necessary first step on this topic. So questions?
Is
The
it,
only one I had, I'm sorry,
no, you go.
I know we have to do it for the new schools. So is there any savings by not doing it for the intermediate school? Because basically the information we're gonna get from that is gonna replicate what we're getting from the new heritage school.
It will be similar, except we are asking, if you were to look at like the presentation that has very targeted
Right.
areas, we're asking them to look at like some of the newer apartments, the ones by McDonald's for all of the grades, that'd be 5 through 12. And so they have in their pricing for the existing schools doing a separate look, and the reason why there's additional costs is they use a totally different approach where the age of the children for 5th and 6th grade is factored into what they look at, as opposed to K through 4. So they very likely will come back with different recommendations based on ages, and right now our plan is just a blanket K through 8. It's the same no matter what your age is.
It's kind of a two-part question. When they come back with recommendations, does it lay out the cost implication to the district with that recommendation?
We would have to do that with Lamers. So as an
Okay.
example, if 7th and 8th graders no longer have busing across the entrance of Centennial to Community Drive, we would go to Lamers and say, if we removed 7th and 8th graders from being able to ride the bus, what does that mean?
Okay. And the second part of the question, I think you've already answered most of the way. I was trying to understand for the scope of the work that they're doing, there'd be a different study or scope creep within that study to ask, okay, our current policy, I can't remember the exact distances, like a mile, 1.2.
Yep.
The longest one being for the high school.
Yep.
Focusing on the high school for a moment, what would be the cost implication if we were to change that policy and shorten that distance to a mile?
Yep.
And overlay that with whatever savings we may have, because the safety has adjusted to be more safe.
Mhm.
That would be a Lamers exercise is what I'm hearing, and I
Yes.
just to confirm that.
Yep, that's
Okay.
correct. And really, what you're thinking about right now, Dawn, is exactly what we would then do as the next step.
Mhm.
Is we would then apply the hazardous transportation policy towards the policies, which kind of goes into the second phase of what Randy was suggesting in November.
I guess the question also, out of these studies, will they give us recommendations like if you put different safety precautions here? You know, like the lights, you know, where you push the button.
Absolutely.
So
Yes.
they'll give us those recommendations and so forth.
Yep,
So
absolutely.
And that'll be taken into consideration when they look at this too. Yeah, we'll certainly see like Century Avenue, it's got different amenities now than when it was initially developed. But it's to Steve's and John's point, it's gonna be a kind of a progression. You're gonna get a study, then that study then has to be applied to policy and then also to what Lamers is. So there's definitely quite that the traffic study will take you 3 to 4 months, and then there'll be additional traffic.
Motion to approve?
Second,
all in favor?
Aye.
Passed.
Thank you. So if we need to end the meeting at 9, that's totally fine. We can bring the Lamers discussion back. It is an important one for you to have the chance to talk it through. There's no necessarily like date that has to be looked at as far as this meeting or the next meeting, but the whole point of this discussion is our 7-year contract expires at the conclusion of summer school. So think August of 2024 prior to the next school year. We need to make a decision to either extend the existing contract or seek proposals. We would definitely need to have that decision made sometime in early 2024. The way we're looking at it, and that's what we're looking for feedback on, and again, don't want to pressure you if you want the time to think this through, is the concept of a 3-year extension. The reason for a concept of a 3-year extension is the challenges that are presented when you open new school buildings. Potentially change hazardous transportation boundaries, potentially change your policies. You've seen in the news the challenges other districts have gone through when they've gone through changes with transportation vendors. It's not a reason not to do it. It's more of a timing discussion in my mind, like when would you want to have that discussion? Ideally, you don't want to have the discussion about changing transportation vendors when you're opening a new school, changing hazardous transportation boundaries. And also, to be honest with you, a superintendent change is a big deal. I mean, Randy works really closely with Lamers and has a great relationship with them. And I'm just going to speak that I would assume the new person would prefer to work with an experienced transportation person in our district when they're making decisions on closing school.
But I guess this, I agree with Steve. We can kind of push this off to the next one if you want more discussion, but from our perspective, when you look at all the things we got moving in our system, this isn't the one to touch right now. And to extend it out till we get through some of the pieces that are the moving parts of the school, the change in leadership, all the pieces Steve laid out. It makes sense then to take it out to RFP after that, but I think it would be very challenging from us as a district to manage it and manage it well to do it right now.
If we do the route, sorry, did you want to go
Yeah,
first?
go ahead.
If we go the route of the 3-year extension, does it have to be with all the same terms and conditions of the original seven-year contract, or is that negotiable without necessarily going to RFP?
No, that's all negotiable.
Yeah.
Well, the reason said I'm willing to move forward with it today. I don't see any value in going to market, given the transitions we're facing, and also again, as we all read in the newspapers, a lot of districts have had tremendous problems with a new provider, and so.
Other things, Don, you'd like to talk about with them there that you
Well, I'd
have
like
in
to
mind or just
see
would
it.
like
I've
to
never
just
seen
like to
it.
review it?
Yeah, and I don't think
Maybe
things
it's
have been
something
going
like
well
that with
with
the
Lamers, and I don't think a lot of parents would agree things have been going well with
Well, I
Lamers.
think if you talk to that issue or address that issue, I don't think any bus company is, stellar performance. And I think Lamers has been better, in this 7 years than they were previous.
So I think if you're open to it, so we could have more time in January, I can get the actual contract in here for you to see. I can begin a conversation about what negotiations would look like for an extension. And put you in the position to know more about this than you do today. But if it was like a hard no from this committee, we're not even willing to look at it, that would have sent Ally and I down a different path. If you're at least willing to discuss the topic of an extension, we can get you more information. And we still have plenty of time to go either route. But we just want to get the dialogue going, basically.
So. Yeah, I think that idea, why don't you bring in the information and we'll be able to make a better decision next meeting.
So we have to vote on moving this forward.
Yeah, to January. And then just sharing with you, we put the audit in here, it's on the agenda for Monday night. You have plenty of time to take a look at it if you would want to, and it's also in the packet. There's the management or the letter from the auditors to the board members are in the board packet as well. We weren't gonna ask for any recommendations from this committee. We was giving you, it's coming, it's in the agenda for Monday. You're welcome to get an early look at it if you want.
79 pages.
So there's a lot there, but we're not requesting any action on it, and we appreciate you coming in this morning at 7:30 and giving us an hour and a half of your time. So thank you.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? We changed it up.
Aye.
Good, and Jack will send you a meeting invite for tomorrow morning.
Yeah, you can worry
So
about
we're
it. You
moving
can
on.
find out.
Yeah, it'll be quick.
All right, we can go back to my house.
Yeah.